everyone. Today, I'm here with Marcel Hernandez. Marcel is the developmental director for Tucker's House, which is a really cool nonprofit in Tennessee. And I invited him here to talk all about it. Hi, Marcel.
Hi, Stephen. How are you?
I'm great. So perhaps we could just dig right in. What is Tucker's House?
Tucker's House is a Tennessee-based 501c3 nonprofit that provides home modifications for families who have children with disabilities.
All right. And typically, what kind of modifications are we talking about?
So we do a lot of accessible modifications in bathrooms, entryways. We really like to empower families to prioritize the areas in the home that they would like to address. And really, we try to stay inside the home. We do have some partners that provide what I would call in-kind labor that helps us with the exterior. So, for example, ramps at the entryways themselves.
Hi. And is this exclusively in Tennessee, or do you do projects outside of Tennessee?
We're currently exclusively in Middle Tennessee.
Middle Tennessee. What are the major cities in Middle Tennessee?
Our home office is in Franklin, Tennessee, which is just south of Nashville. So if you're familiar with the Middle Tennessee area, Nashville's in Davidson County and Franklin is Williamson County. And we've historically been based out of Franklin, Tennessee, and about a 40 to 45-minute radius outside of the Franklin area is our service area.
I understand that the nonprofit has been around since 2009. How many families have you done projects over those years?
Stephen, that's a question that often comes up, and we, at the onset, did not have a great vehicle to capture that data. We estimate anywhere from 1,200 to 1,500 individuals over the years. And at any given year, about 100 to 120 individuals is who we work with and help out.
Now, that's a lot of construction projects in any given year.
Yes.
Do you guys, so I have so many questions. First question, How are these programs financed? How are they paid?
So all of these are community projects. And so we are 100% privately funded. So meaning we currently do not receive any type of local, state, or federal funds. Now we do have partners who do, of course, any combination of grants through foundations, through corporate foundations, through corporate partners, as well as, of course, our community champions on the individual side, and anywhere from $20 a month on up to, we received one recently for $100,000 from an individual through that family's foundation. It's a combination of all these different things, but 100% privately funded.
Wow. So does that income from these private donors and these non-government associated foundations, does it pay all of the cost of doing 120 plus projects a year?
So yes, these financial partners cover 100% of the costs for our AIM program, which is essentially our core program where we come in and do an assessment, beginning with our program manager, and bring in a therapist to really look at the mobility in the home, and a very, very specialized role.
An occupational therapist?
Occupational, physical, yes. And so they're really looking at what does the day-to-day look like. As you probably know, for caregivers, it can be very taxing, particularly over time as children get older. And then from that standpoint, that information gets passed on to our architect or architectural designer, who then is informed by, again, the family's experiences and kind of day-to-day events in the home. And then finally, it's passed on to our construction partner, who brings everything to life. And we really work with the family so that they can be the co-authors of these individualized home modifications.
I think it's great. Do you think about long-term aging in place parameters when you're doing something? Because you mentioned at the beginning, you're primarily focused on children, but
Yes.
These children are going to get older. They are going to grow. Some of them are going to get taller and bigger. Is the design take that into account?
100%. In fact, that's one of the reasons why we distinguish ourselves from, almost every family that we encounter has had this come up at the very least, at the kitchen table in terms of discussing, hey, we really need to do something for Johnny to be able to live comfortably and independently, not just while we're here, but as he gets older. And so we have found that when we come into the home, we want to make sure that we're thinking about not just the diagnosis, but the prognosis of the child, so that we can plan ahead and not have to come back every 3 to 5, maybe even 10 years as that child gets older, becomes a young adult, because families, of course, want to have peace of mind that their children will have a comfortable space to live in as the years go by and as the generations pass. And so we really focus on providing that lifetime solution. Where some are looking for kind of a day-to-day impact, we really focus on going perhaps just an inch wide, but a mile deep in terms of the impact that we make with each household.
I am sure that the impact you guys make can't be measured in how it's life changing. How do families find you?
To your point that you just made, so we are working to actually capture some of that information on how it can be measured quantitatively. And one of the ways that we do that is utilizing a Likert scale post project completion. And so we look at, in other words, it's a rating scale that where we come back and we survey families and really give them time to live in the space to make sure that everything is working for them. And then look at
Wow.
not just the physical benefits, but of course, as mom, dad, other caregiver is now not necessarily having to do quite as many manual transfers throughout the year. They have not just physical relief, but of course, emotional relief. And we really want to make sure that we're providing that emotional relief. One of the things that we're looking at in doing that is partnering with either an agency or individual that can capture some of that more clinical mental health data that will then allow us to really showcase the positive impact that it's making on the mental health or mental wellness side. And so it's
Well,
really something where trying to capture the whole person, the whole family unit.
I really love that because one of the thing I found doing a lot of interviews for this podcast is that care providers are overwhelmed and
For sure.
not enough people are thinking about the people who are providing the care. And
Hmm.
that some of them are aging out of place to be able to support their loved ones. And the more we can make it easier for them, the better. So have you had families who've done some sort of postmortem, some sort of review after the fact and have said, well, this isn't quite right? And how did you address that?
So we in our surveys, we have near 100% in terms of what I would characterize as client satisfaction. So in my tenure, I've been with Tucker's House just over a year. We haven't had a single time where we had to go back and redo things, apart from your standard punch list, right? Where there's certain items that, maybe there's a trim paint here that needed some touch up or something along those lines, but nothing that was major in terms of a reinstallation. And that includes everything from durable medical equipment on up to installing zero entry showers, roll under sinks, and really ensuring that the child and the caregiver's mobility are taken into account and properly addressed at the onset. So that again, we come in and we provide one solution and it lasts for the duration of the life of that individual.
That's great. So I watched a video I'm going to share with my listeners about
Hmm.
Zola and your
Yes.
house to home series. I want to hear about the house to home series. But
Mhm.
in that video, in the accompanying notes of that video, there was a reference made to some service provision you guys did beyond merely the physical construction of an accessible property. So in the video about Zola, in the project details on the website, it talks about how you guys actually helped her to order some of the DME that was needed for this modification. And I
Mhm.
thought that was kind of cool because it went a little bit beyond merely doing the job of modifying the home. Tell me more about that.
Sure. So some of the projects that we do focus solely on durable medical equipment. So for viewers who may not know the DME acronym, and so we help with not only ordering, but also we have companies that help with the installs. And finally, once the installs are complete, because of the way that our therapist team works, we are able to orient or acclimate or train the family, the caregivers themselves on how to operate the equipment. Again, as you may know, and some viewers may know, some equipment lends itself to a single installation, some to multiple. But what we do is we ensure that it's the fit for the particular family and their particular need. There's multi-story homes, sometimes there's basements, sometimes there's more temporary equipment for bathrooms. It just really depends on the family's needs. But yes, it's really important that we have the therapy informed approach because it's not just a simple remodel, repair, or construction project that people are kind of used to when we hear about these sorts of things. It's very specific and specialized to the family's needs. And again, we do everything to preserve the family's voice and choice through the entire process so that it is really their plan and we're facilitating the realization of that plan.
So tell me more about the house to home series and what you're trying to convey with these videos.
Yeah, so House to Home is a video series that really just gives viewers a behind the scenes look at what goes into these accessible home modifications. And so you touched earlier on the aspect that caregivers can sometimes be the forgotten component of families with children with disabilities or families with any individual disabilities. And the way that I relate that, particularly when I'm doing an in-person presentation, is we get a couple of volunteers and we do a single leg lunge, for example, for 30 seconds to 60 seconds. And of course, we all know that if you're doing it just on the right leg, you're going to start to feel a little burn on your quad. And then we try to extend that, imagining doing that for 10 minutes straight and then for an hour straight. And of course, we know that many of us would probably not last longer than a minute or two, right? But we relate that to a caregiver because homes and the bathrooms and the different items in a home are fixed. And so a caregiver is obviously going to rely on the stronger side of the body, particularly when doing these manual transfers. That's what we really try to alleviate because we know that like lunge for 5 minutes is one thing, but doing a manual transfer on the right side over 10, 15, 20 years, we know that an imbalance is going to develop. So House to Home captures the spirit of these different challenges that these families are facing and the way that they're overcoming them. And in the latest trailer that you've seen, you see a mom and her 13-year-old son, and she is actually picking him up and crab walking down the hallway sideways as she's holding him, and then kind of turning sideways again to get into the bathroom, and then leaning over, putting a lot of strain on her lower back, her hamstrings, just her body in general, just to place him in the bathtub. And so hence, of course, the zero entry shower, where she can then have much more accessibility and a way to move around the house. I hate to use the word easier, but in a more fluid way that is just safer for both her and for her son. And so House to Home captures these things. And it also features our financial partners that we talked about earlier. So Churchill Mortgage, for example, is our season-long partner. We have 4 episodes that are coming out, and episode 2 is wrapping up to be released December 2023. And of course, the next episode to come out Q1 of 2024 with episode 3. But Churchill Mortgage has really facilitated the launch of this series in a very meaningful way. And it just made sense to partner with them, of course, because of the business that they're in. House to Home came to mind in a discussion as a team. And really that was underscored. One of our board members made the comment to me at one of our board meetings that his mom had like a placard or a quote hanging on their kitchen wall. Let me try and remember it now. It said, "A house is made of wooden beams. A home is made of love and dreams." And of course, that really stuck with me because it's capturing the sentiments behind what we all feel as we were once children and now adults and perhaps parents for many of us, of what it means to truly feel at home. It's not just a place that has walls, but it's a place where we have safety, where you have comfort. And of course, this is ideally, right? Some of us may have not had that experience, but House to Home is really a way to convey what that transformation means that all of our partners facilitate through their support of the families here in Middle Tennessee.
I think it's great. So, Marcel, I asked before, and we kind of got sidetracked in such a good discussion. How do families find out about this service? How do they qualify?
Yes, so we have been historically 100% referral based. We have referrals from many healthcare providers, as well as a local like Vanderbilt Children's Hospital. And then more recently, of course, with House to Home, one of the goals that we're going for is to attract additional families to be able to take advantage of these services. And so because of that, we've had a lot of public facing exposure, both through, of course, social media, right? Like everybody does, but also your traditional media appearances like this that you graciously invited us to participate in, and just really spreading awareness and looking at the different areas where we provide services and trying to maximize what we do in our current Middle Tennessee region so that we can be much more intentional when we look at expansion in the coming years.
So, are there qualification criteria? I mean, I'm sure the demand is greater than the ability of you to do.
Always. So at any given time, there's up to 25 families on the waiting list. In fact, we've had to, just like I'm sure you've seen in the real estate world and the landscaping outside, you put up, stones and rocks to kind of address water runoff issues. Similar approach. We've implemented more recently application windows so that we can be much more intentional and time things that it's at a comfortable pace for families and applicants. Of course, we don't like turning folks down. And ultimately, that's why we seek to continually grow in terms of our development. On my side, where I serve as director for development, we're adding a coordinator to help facilitate some of that growth and to really help with some of the marketing so that we can really enter additional markets. For example, you may know in Tennessee, the Spanish speaking population has grown tremendously over the last 30 years or so. I've been in Middle Tennessee since the late 90s, and I've seen not just the growth with the development that many, kind of cities have seen, but we really know that there's an ongoing need in communities that are not just underserved economically, but working with families with disabilities is just, I think, inherently marginalized because it's often the forgotten component of diversity, equity, and inclusion, for example.
Tell me about
And
it.
so, and so ultimately, it's a matter of identifying these different needs and being a little more intentional about how we are serving not just the individual household and family, but the community at large.
There must be a baseline for who can apply. Do they have to show income parameters? Do they have to have the child under a certain age? What are your baseline for applicants?
We used to do children and young adults, and we have maintained that over the years. We are really trying to hone in on children, which I guess you could say that there's not a firm line that we either publicly or internally have per se, but you could say like 18 and under, right? But the reason I said there's not a firm line is because we recently did a young man in his 20s. We did an assessment for an individual that was in their 40s that I can't quite remember, Stephen, what year that was. But what I'm saying is that we have the criteria, we focus on children. From an income standpoint, again, that's not something that's public facing. What I can say is this, is that we, of course, look at federal poverty guidelines, but knowing that families who have children with disabilities have a ton of out-of-pocket expenses, we can't get the full picture on just looking at a tax return. Of course, the tax return is part of that, but we really want to have a conversation with the family and say, hey, what are some other items that you're really focusing on? So, of course, you've got your different clinic visits. Sometimes you have individuals coming into homes. And really on the flip side of that is that once we provide these accessible home modifications, that then enables the family to have healthcare workers in the home. And forgive me for not knowing this, but I know in Tennessee, at the very least, it might be across the country, some healthcare providers have certain criteria themselves that before these things are addressed or exist in the home, they won't even come into the home. And so part of what we're trying to do is free up some of the family's dollars on a monthly and annual basis to be able to spend on the necessary therapies and clinic visits and additional caretakers that may be necessary.
It's really so distressing to hear that. And I know it's in many, many states, but it's a catch-22. It's an awful thing for a healthcare provider to say, well, we can't help your child because the home isn't adequately accessible, right? That's awful.
I'll say when I was younger and I would hear these types of things, it was very disillusioning, right? For somebody my age, you say acquired more life experience instead of gotten older, right? As I've acquired more life experience, I've learned the intricacies of things like navigating insurance and navigating even just a healthcare provider in general. And really in my nonprofit experience, working hand in hand with families on the phone, advocating, all these different things, I've started to learn more about how complex that process really is. And of course, part of it's philosophical, part of it's political, and everything else, right? But what we do is we say, hey, let's look at what your family, in the case of a family that we're serving, let's look at what your family is faced with, what challenges you currently have, how you're overcoming them, what works for you, what doesn't work, and then where we can really support and fill in some gaps that you may not have support now, or maybe you haven't even thought about. And again, that really goes back to why we take a therapy informed approach. I don't ever want to come into a family's home and say, you should do A, B, and C. I would rather say, hey, thanks for welcoming me into your home. What are your priorities and how can we help? It's similar, but it's much more of I guess, use the word holistic earlier. It's much more of a holistic process when we are building relationships and saying, you're the expert in your life and in your child's life. What do you need? And here's how we can help.
You aware of any similar type agencies, nonprofits for older folks whose homes are not working for them anymore?
Are you talking nonprofits?
Yeah, it seems that there should be this type of service for people of all ages.
Sure. So in Middle Tennessee, there are two that come to mind, and one of them is Westminster Home Connection. They really focus on older population. I can't speak to their specific process, but I know that they are just historically and relationally a solid partner when it comes to community impact and working with that demographic in terms of age. And there's also Habitat Sumner, which is the county just north of us, north of Davidson County, I should say. And they have a positive reputation on helping that same age demographic. Everywhere that I go in the region, right, that works with individual with disabilities or even on the advocacy side, across the board, those two agencies come up the most when it comes to helping folks, with aging in place and, also veterans and just other age brackets or age groups that we may not specifically focus on.
So what keeps you up at night?
Worried about my own children.
Uh,
So that's definitely on the personal side. So for me, in everything that I've seen in nonprofit and in life in general, one of my priorities as a parent is ensuring that, and we have two boys, they are 6 and 4, 6-year-old's about to be 7 this Sunday, actually Saturday. I had to look at the calendar. But point being is that one of the things that I worry about the most is ensuring that my wife and I set a strong enough foundation for them psychologically that when they're young adults and teenagers and young adults, and when they depart from common sense, that they will have a solid foundation and really kind of the concept of home that we talked about psychologically, they'll have a place to come home to. That's one of my top priorities as a parent.
and is that what inspired you to get involved with Tucker's House?
I would say indirectly. I'm a nonprofit founder myself. I founded an organization in 2016, and that organization, it's called Be About Change, focuses on impacting youth that are either justice involved or on a trajectory that is pointing toward justice involvement. So we have relationships with the local juvenile court, local school districts, and really try to focus on even as young as elementary school with literacy, but redirecting or repositioning those trajectories away from justice involvement and really what leads to adult incarceration. So that experience on the program side really has shown me probably many more things that we can get into in a brief podcast. But of course, you're dealing with the psychological component. And our executive director, Graham, actually joined me on several of our program sessions, which are really leadership courses for facilitating what I would call self-actualization for young people. So a lot of discussion, a lot of, hey, what's important to you in the community, some financial literacy, but just different topics that are not academic centric. And learning a lot from the program side of that, and ultimately development, so fundraising, is really what interested me more in the fundraising role, knowing that it truly takes an entire community to elevate a young person's voice. And also in the case of Tucker's House, to elevate a young person's trajectory through life. And that's one thing that I was missing experientially, was supporting children on the physical side, let's say. I have a belief that individuals that struggle, I guess mentally, physically, or both, are, in my estimation, really what I would just say closer to God, closer to divinity. And it's something that's really inspiring, watching young people overcome some of those challenges. That experience and observing that is really what has called me into this role.
Wow, that's something. I have always found that so many people that we might look at as having deficiencies are the most positive, enthusiastic people we interact with.
100%. Maybe it has a lot to do with gratitude. I've observed that, I guess you could say, people that are less corrupted by life, like even looking at interacting with and observing our own children, trying to see the world through a child's eyes, it's a blessing to just be afforded that opportunity.
Yeah. Wow. Well, we're almost out of time. I can't believe this has been such a great conversation. So, Marcel, people want to learn more about Tucker's House and about the work your nonprofit is doing. What should they do? How should they reach out?
First and foremost, anyone who has any questions, wants support, I invite you to call me directly, 615-953-9572. And of course, I'm sure you may include some of this information in the various text component. But also more generally, tuckershouse.org. And at the very top is where you'll see the House to Home episodes, and you'll get the preview that we talked about. And if you want to email info@tuckershouse.org, is going to be the best way to kind of capture whether you're a family that's interested in services or an individual corporation, foundation interested in supporting. And of course, YouTube, all your social media as well. So House to Home is, you'll see kind of front and center when it comes to our various social media platforms. And I would say for someone who is not necessarily ready to make direct contact, the website, tuckershouse.org, will be the best place that serves as a hub for all of the above, for all the aforementioned, I should say.
I will certainly put links to the videos. The one I watched about Zola, only 13 minutes long, and it was very compelling. And when it struck me in a number of interesting ways, like the shower stall they had just had a little lip in it. It wasn't like a total bathtub with shower over tub, like a typical bathtub, but it still was inadequate for their needs. And I've been saying for years that different people with physical challenges have different needs. But a layperson might look at that and say, there's just a little half an inch lip at that shower stall. Why wasn't that adequate? So I thought that was very interesting.
So there are two moments in that episode that stood out to me personally. And one of them was, of course, identify with the father, talking about safety and ways to get in and out of the home should there ever be an emergency. And him having experienced more peace of mind, knowing that the safety component was more meaningfully addressed, particularly for Zola. And then Zola's, of course, articulation of what that meant for her as well. And her, really being more of a part of the family, being able to come and go with the family. I believe in that case, it was the back door. But then finally, there was a part where mom was talking about when she was combing her hair and helping her wash her hands. There's a moment, it's a very kind of fleeting moment in that episode, but there's a moment when you see Zola coming into her bathroom and she's looking at herself in the mirror. And in the episode, you hear her talk about that. But when you see it visually, we know that when we are able to see ourselves, of course, it's a powerful artistic image, but it's also very meaningful in the way that I perceive her conveying that and what it means to her. I can see who I am. It's like a truer, tangible identity, right?
Yeah, I recommend anyone hearing or watching this podcast definitely check out the video link I share with you guys. And it's really compelling. Anyway, we're out of time. Marcel, thank you so much for
Thank you,
being with me
Stephen.
today. I appreciate it.